Okay, welcome. So we're going to conclude the analysis of the philosophy of law today. And in doing this, we're going to go over a lot of what we've already covered, but summarize it and synthesize all of the different areas. So in this, I'm going to analyze law through the combined perspective of a number of philosophers and economists, people like Hayek, Mises, Rand, Sowell, etc. So at the fundamental aspect of what we've covered, law is the cornerstone of civilization. It serves as a system of rules designed to structure society, maintain order, uphold justice, and secure liberty. At its core, the purpose of law transcends mere regulation. It is really the aspect of what we have built as humans that acts as a foundation for peaceful coexistence. It enables individuals to interact and flourish without fear of coercion or chaos, and it provides a framework to ensure predictability, accountability, fairness, and all those areas that are essential for societal harmony and human flourishing. Thomas Sowell, as my first example, provides a pragmatic perspective on this. His view on the purpose of law is one that he describes as a framework that balances the inevitable trade-offs between competing interests of society. For Sowell, law is not about achieving perfection, but about creating a system that accommodates the complexity of human interactions while managing conflicts in a way that sustains societal stability. So we've covered many of these things, and the key aspect here is that law isn't perfect. It is, like everything else, a tool. And Hayek also saw that quite well. Hayek emphasized the role of law in maintaining spontaneous order. According to Hayek, law facilitates the emergence of order from the voluntary actions of individuals within a free society. It acts as a guide, shaping expectations, fostering cooperation without the need for centralized control. Hayek's view had laws evolving organically, the common law, in effect, an understanding of natural law. So this reflected the accumulated wisdom and practices of society over time. Ayn Rand, likewise, shifted the focus from moral functions of law, portraying it as a protector of the individual's rights, and the rights against coercion. For Rand, the law exists to ensure that no individual or group may initiate force against others. It is really something that safeguards life, safeguards liberty, and safeguards property. Law becomes the guarantor of a free society where rational individuals can pursue their values and aspirations without interference. Probably the opposite of what we see in the World Economic Forum, the concept of you will own nothing and be free and happy and all the rest, which is antithetical to all of this. It is the removal of property and rights. Ludwig von Mises offers an economic lens, again, viewing law as the enabler of economic cooperation and the protector of private property. That's something we see through all of these. Mises argues that without a legal framework to define property rights and enforce contracts, the market cannot function effectively. So this is something where the ANACAPs sit out there arguing that we can have a system without law. And they quote Mises and they quote Hayek, and yet they fail to understand that you can't have a system without laws. Law provides the foundation for economic interaction. It allows individuals to specialize, to exchange goods and services, and to create wealth within a stable and predictable environment, the type that Adam Smith talked about. So when we are going into the need for law not to exceed certain bounds, etc., that is to keep it within these perspectives. And together, we can see these converge on a unified vision. Law is not merely a set of arbitrary rules, but a very carefully constructed system designed to balance competing interests, a system designed to maintain order, protect individual freedom, and at the sort of heart of it, enable human flourishing. So when we go into the philosophy of law, whether we're looking at political systems, as we've discussed in the past with Montesquieu, etc., or whether we're looking at the foundations of how it develops, then what we really need to come back to are the two major pillars we discussed, natural law and common law. It is these frameworks that provide a distinct yet complementary insight into how societies that work define, interpret, and apply legal principles. Natural law, as we discussed, is rooted in the idea of moral universals. This is functional principles that are inherent to the majority of people in human nature. These are discoverable through reason. Natural law, whether we're going back to Plato and Aristotle or further on after that, is one that asserts that these universal truths provide the foundation for justice and legitimacy in any legal system. It's the foundation that originally made Britain strong before it went off the rails a bit. And it's the foundation that allowed the United States to become what it is. The US, again, have moved away from some of this. Hopefully we'll see it going back. But the idea here is finding the heart of what is the foundation of law and minimizing the constraints we have, a base system. So Aristotle first articulated the concept. We covered Aristotle a few years ago now. And Aristotle argued that natural law reflects the rational order of the universe and the ultimate purpose, or teleos, of human beings. This is to achieve virtue and the good life. This analogous sort of view is also seen in Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas refined this view and integrated it with Christian theology. Aquinas posited that natural law is derived from divine law, and because of this, it is accessible through reason, and in that asserted that unjust laws, those that conflict with moral principles, are not true laws at all. So this then aligns with Rand's philosophy again. Rand's philosophy of objectivism holds that the foundation of moral universals exist, but diverge from those of Aquinas and the theistic interpretation, because she doesn't hold with that. But for Rand, morality is grounded in reason and the objective requirements of human life. Law in this must be aligned with the rational principles that govern individual rights as an absolute moral imperative. So Rand rejects all forms of relativism, as we saw, and that emphasizes that laws must hold to unchanging, set in stone, ethical standards rather than transient norms. We also covered, in comparison at times, the common law. The common law really founded in sort of the interplay between the common people and, well, feudal government, developed in contrast and alongside natural law. Common law evolved organically through judicial decisions and precedents. It's rooted in medieval England, and it relies on the principle of stare decisis, the obligation of courts to follow established precedents. Common law's adaptability allows it to respond to changing societal needs, conditions, and continue in a predictable manner. Hayek champions common law. The sort of way that Hayek talks is not anti-government, as many people try and say, but rather a small system that upholds property rights and a system that reflects the, well, combined wisdom of society. So if we take Hayek at this, common law is really an evolutionary process that arises from the lived experience, the knowledge that has derived over many, many generations, the interactions of individuals, rather than being imposed from above. It is a spontaneous order, something that has developed itself, embodying the trial and error wisdom of many generations. It evolves. So through this adaptability, we see something that becomes a critical foundation of maintaining social cohesion in a complex, ever-changing world without having to force anything upon people. That differs significantly from the civil law in Europe or many other forms of law around the world that have evolved, where it's top down. And the intersections and tensions that apply here, well, developed in a different way. While natural law and common law share a commitment to justice, their philosophical underpinnings place them in tension, but in a way that is very different from the top-down enforced law that makes people act in certain ways. Natural law emphasizes moral absolutes. These can clash with the flexibility of common law. The former demands that laws conform to a universal ethical standard, while the latter prioritizes practical adaptability and the gradually adopting evolution of norms. It creates a dichotomy that raises a fundamental question that we covered last week. Should law serve as an unyielding moral guide, or should it adapt to societal realities? And as we were discussing, judges have a call to make, and when they take it too far, it, well, basically strays into, well, activism, etc. So again, this is where we see Rand and Hayek both exemplify this tension. Rand here is really focused on objective ethics. It's a focus more on an ideal, an objective foundation of a just legal system. It rejects any relativism, which is inherent in evolving customs, and embraces the conservative nature of society, the past. For Rand, law's purpose is to protect individual rights based on the immutable rational principles that we find in virtue, discussed for thousands of years, right back from the time of Aristotle, of course. Hayek values the organic development of law through tradition, while it's still not something where we see the forced top-down exchange of statutes. It is more flexible in that he argues that a decentralized incremental adjustment better reflects the complexities of human society. So despite those tensions, natural law and common law complement one another, as we also discussed. Natural law provides the moral compass and ensures that laws remain grounded in justice. It can be a bit rigid sometimes, though, and sometimes our interpretation of natural law might be wrong. Alternatively, common law offers flexibility. It is the way that we can adapt to new circumstances, but left on its own, we move away from the wisdom of crowds into, well, the mob mentality that can sometimes evolve. So when combined, natural law and common law combine create a dynamic framework for legal systems that balances ethical consistency with practical responsiveness. And that allows us, as we've seen, to have a system that is very flexible, evolves to new technologies, etc. The common law could always embrace new technology. The argument that blockchain or something else is new is wrong. As many jurists in England have shown, the English law has adapted to new technology without the need for statute for hundreds of years, if not more. So Lord Denning, for instance, I've mentioned many times, argued about laws on fax machines, payments, italics, etc., by using analogies of people paying by calling out across a river, as one example. So going back to the purpose of law, the law serves as the bedrock of a civilized society. It is the way that we have individual liberty and societal cohesion delivered. If law is structured correctly, it establishes order, upholds liberty, and balances competing interests. It enables human flourishing, mitigating conflicts, and, well, fixes some of the problems we see with social interactions, which will always occur. Now, the way to look at this is law should be something like the rules in a monopoly game. It's not there to make everything fair in the way that equitable fairness would be, where we say everyone needs to have an equal start or an equal amount of money or something else. It's fair in that the rules are the same for everyone. And how the outcome happens, well, it doesn't matter. We can't set that. no matter how much we try, we can never decide that everything's going to end up equal, and people will do their best to muck that up anyway. So establishing order in a complex and interdependent society, laws have provide a predictable framework that guides human behavior. That allows us to foster stability and cooperation. Without laws, we have no trade. So Hayek emphasized that laws function as guides for predictable behavior in a way that enables individuals to make informed decisions. Again, trade. So by creating an environment where we have expectations that are clear, the law reduces uncertainty and facilitates spontaneous order. The predictability here is particularly vital in society marked by diverse values and interactions, as it allows individuals to coexist without centralized direction. We don't have to have ways of sitting there above and telling what you can and can't say and what you're going to go to prison in many countries, including Britain now, for saying wrong. Mises also adds an economic dimension to this. In the writings of Ludwig von Mises, for instance, on liberalism, the role of law is highlighted defining property rights and enforcing contracts more than anything else, contracts being a promise between individuals. So for Mises, a functioning free society market relies on, excuse me, a legal framework that protects ownership, ensures the fulfillment of agreements, and resolves disputes. Without that system, economic cooperation would devolve into chaos, and innovation and prosperity would not be possible. So the alternatives are, of course, that we have a top-down system that forces everything on people. Now, that can work very well where we have a unified society where people are the same and there's not a variety of differences between how we interact. Even then, innovation can be stifled. So if we want a dynamic society, one where people create, build, develop, and well, then that's why we need this approach. And that's been part of the distinction between what has developed in the current world compared to the past. In the past, Roman law, while there weren't many Roman soldiers enforcing anything, it was a top-down approach. Excuse me. So upholding liberty is part of why order is essential. It cannot come, however, at the expense of individual freedom. Law must be designed to protect liberty, to ensure that individuals can act without interference, as long as they don't interfere with the rights of others. Rand asserts the primary purpose of law, as I've said, is to safeguard individual rights. Those are what she considers the moral basis of just society. By prohibiting the initiation of force, law ensures that individuals pursue their values and live according to rational judgment. For Rand, liberty is not merely a privilege, but a fundamental necessity if we are going to flourish as humanity. Sowell approaches liberty through the lens of societal constraints. He overlaps some of the others and acknowledges that no society can function without limitations or absolute freedom. Sowell argues that these constraints are necessary trade-offs. They balance individual liberties with the collective need for order. However, it is important to warn against arbitrary or excessive restrictions, advocating for laws that reflect practical realities rather than ideology, aspirations that people put in, the utopian dreams of people wanting something more. So in this, we have to balance those interests. We might want to change things, but it's necessary to remember that it's a competing interest. So in addition to establishing order and upholding liberty, law serves as a mechanism for balancing competing interests, preventing the concentration of power, and managing conflict. What law really was to Hayek was a counterbalance to arbitrary power, whether this is exercised by individuals or institutions, whether it's government, corporations, etc. Codifying rules that can apply universally, the monopoly game once again. Law limits the ability of any one individual to impose its will on others and basically creates a decentralized system of power where the decentralization of power preserves freedom and prevents tyranny. So while it might seem great if you're the elite who is in power, then the problem, of course, is it doesn't really develop the growth that we have in our modern societies. This trade-off in law must reflect historical and institutional realities as well. Legal systems should be grounded in the practical experience and constraints of society rather than those utopian ideals. Sal's really written about this many times, looking at the anointed, etc., as he puts them, the elites. And if we don't do this and we allow those utopian ideals, we really get the ideal dystopia. A pragmatic approach that Sal really ensues is one that ensures that laws are both effective and enduring. They last. They address the complexities of human interaction, and they don't lead to unintended consequences. They can be planned and understood. So through this, again, I will argue that the, well, purpose of law really comes to its ability to establish order, to remove chaotic problems that allow us to change, allow flexibility, allow randomness, but simultaneously allow upholding liberty, balance the competing interests, and, well, allow us to be free in a way that doesn't impinge on the freedoms of others. So a just legal system is one that not only maintains societal stability, but protects those individual freedoms, navigating the inevitable conflict of diverse human aspirations. So in striking that delicate balance, the law becomes not a set of rules, but a foundation for a thriving, harmonious society. So we also recently covered some of the failings. One of the big ones that I've mentioned multiple times is excessive judicial activism. So legal systems, while essential for developing order, as we said, justice needs to be delivered, are not without ways that they can be subverted. These failings arise from a number of things: activism, as noted, economic efficiencies, moral ambiguity, practical missteps, misunderstandings, interpretations. So when legal systems deviate from their foundational purpose, they can risk undermining liberty, justice, and cohesion. Society can be split and divided. We see that right now. We see it in Britain. In Britain, we see a society that is slowly breaking and fracturing as the government tries to crack down more on people. And the more that they try and crack down, the more society fractures. Judicial activism, as we discussed in the last few lectures, is where the courts overstep their interpretive role and impose policy or ideological preferences. This poses a profound challenge to the rule of law and societal stability. Hayek was very against this. He warned that the centralization of decision-making that we see in judicial activism undermines decentralized knowledge and the inherent system of common law. Common law, evolving through the practice of experiences of society, captures the collective wisdom of society. But when courts impose a top-down ruling detached from societal norms, they disrupt that organic process and create a legal system that is less responsive to the needs of the people. It aligns in the concepts of Sal, who really talks about judicial overreach being a disregard for the trade-offs inherent in lawmaking. And there are always trade-offs. Courts legislate from the bench, and they do this and they fail to consider the broader societal implications of their decisions. They don't know them. The judiciary rarely engage with the majority of people. They're less so than even the people who are voted in, the representatives, the legislature, etc. While they see people in the courts, they're not able to really understand how people live. And when they prioritize their ideological goals over practical reality, it creates a disconnect that can result in laws that alienate the public and exacerbate societal divisions that we've been talking about. It also causes economic inefficiencies. The legal system may falter when it is imposing excessive regulations, ones that stifle economic productivity and innovation. And this is an area Mises highlighted, noting how over-regulation disrupts the market functions by creating barriers to entry, increased cost, and discouragement of entrepreneurship. Laws intended to protect consumers or ensure fairness may thus result in inefficiencies, and that can hinder competition and growth. A legal framework that fails to respect market principles risks suffocating the dynamism that it seeks to regulate. On top of this, we can then lead into moral ambiguity. Moral ambiguity, well, laws detach from a clear ethical purpose. They can, well, lead to divisions within society, ones that Rand argues are a result of where laws are divorced from objective ethics. They become the tools of tyranny rather than the instruments of individual freedom and justice. The arbitrary or contradictory laws that then get created erode public trust, create a culture of compliance born out of fear rather than moral conviction. And anyone who's had to really deal in compliance will understand this one. Then it's people doing things not because they really want to achieve an end, but to make a tick box. Such a legal system fails to protect rights, it fails to protect the individual, and enables coercion and exploitation under the guise of authority. So some of the practical implications of this: even well-meaning laws can produce unintended and harmful consequences when poorly conceived and implemented. Sal often underscores the gaps between intentions and outcomes in public policy, with legal measures designed to address immediate problems, well, frequently overlooking the secondary or tertiary effects. These can lead to consequences which undermine their original goals. As an example, rent control laws. These were intended to make housing affordable, yet they generally result in shortages and lead to degraded property. We see in New York, where rent control laws have been put in place, people stop building and improving because they're not going to be able to raise the rent. So why spend more money there? And the building degrades to a point where basically it needs to be knocked down and something new without rent control can be built. So Sowers emphasized that ignoring the complexity of these societal systems will often transform the seemingly beneficial law into a source of dysfunction in itself. And overall, what we find in a takeaway from this is that an excessive judicial activism level of disrupts the evolutionary process of the common law. The very nature of the common law is ideologically corrupted when people try and bring in utopian ideological driven policies. Overregulation hampers market efficiency. This stifles innovation and growth. Moral ambiguity in law undermines justice and public trust. This paves the way for tyranny and authoritarianism. We're seeing that already. And the practical missteps that we see born from a failure to anticipate the consequences often magnify societal problems rather than resolving them. So in addressing these different failings, the legal system needs to remain grounded in a decentralized structure of wisdom, economic principle, and objective ethics. It needs to have a pragmatic awareness of societal trade-offs and align with the individual. So by aligning our legal frameworks with these enduring principles, we can create a society that mitigates the risks of systemic failure, ensuring that the law continues to serve its original purpose, not something else. Now, the way forward is to make natural law and common law work and work together. We've covered all of these in a variety of lectures. And if we want a robust legal framework that addresses the complexities of modern life, then natural law and common law must work in harmony. And we must integrate these through a careful balance between the moral absolutes that we can take too far, the practical adaptability that again can be taken too far a different way, and decentralized decision making and economic soundness that, in an ideal that Montesquieu would see is a mix between the Senate and the people, etc., is one that creates a sound foundation. So Hayek, first of all, gives us the decentralization of knowledge. And in this, he emphasized the importance of decentralizing legal decision making to harness dispersed knowledge inherent within society. By allowing the local courts and judges to make decisions informed by specific context and traditions of their communities, the legal system can remain adaptable and grounded in practical reality. This decentralization aligns with the evolutionary nature of common law. Here, precedent arise organically through the lived experience of individuals rather than being imposed through statute or from above by a centralized authority. This approach ensures that the law that we have reflects the diversity in society and remains responsive to the changing conditions of our world without losing coherence. Equally, Sal has the perspective of trade-offs that underscore the need for realistic laws that account for institutional limits and societal constraints. Laws cannot solve all problems simultaneously, and attempting to do so will always create unintended consequences. When we try and force things upon how people will act, then what we end up with is a legal framework that fails to acknowledge the trade-offs and prioritize practical incremental solutions, implementing sweeping reforms that basically fail to address the nuances within society and don't capture, well, the many small bits of knowledge that we talked about with Hayek above. And this fails to recognize the historical and institutional realities that, well, lead lawmakers and judges to no longer have the tools to craft policies and balance competing interests. And this can lead to a destabilization of the system. Now, going back to Rand, we have objectivism and ethics. Her objective ethics form a critical moral foundation for the future of law. To Rand, legislation must be grounded in a rational principle that respects individual rights. For Rand, the protection of life, liberty, and property is non-negotiable. These are the rights from the ethical bedrock of a just society. Beyond that, human rights, well, there's not really much for Rand. It's those three principles that do everything: life, liberty, and property. The laws that deviate from objective ethics, such as those based on arbitrary preferences, collectivist ideals, etc., we see lead to coercion, to injustice. So to ensure that law serves their rightful purpose, we must root them in reason and design them to secure individual freedom, while equally preventing the initiation of force where it's not needed. This then allows us to embrace the economic foundation of law that von Mises provided as a rationale for simplifying legal systems. The overly complex, intrusive laws that stifle innovation, those in, well, any tax law ever invented in any country, hinder market efficiency, erode public trust, and make people fear the legal process. So by streamlining laws to focus on protecting property rights, enforcing contracts, and upholding the rule of law, a government can create a fertile environment for economic growth. And through that growth, we're going to find over time that many of the problems that people talk about go away anyway. A simple, clear legal framework not only supports free markets, but reduces the administrative burden on courts and regulatory bodies. That enhances efficiency overall. So, and this we now see the natural law can meet with common law. And by harmonizing the moral universality of natural law with the adaptability of common law, we have the flexibility of the system, but an anchor that keeps something running correctly in place. While natural law offers an immutable standard of justice, it provides the moral compass that Rand talked about, the one needed to evaluate the legitimacy of why laws exist. Common law, by contrast, thrives on flexibility, evolving through precedent to address new challenges and societal changes. So integrating these, as I keep saying, these frameworks, these legal systems can develop a system that maintains ethical consistency and adapts to the realities of our dynamic world. So the natural law guides judicial reasoning in this. When moral clarity is needed, it is the anchor, while common law has an iterative nature, which ensures that legal principles remain relevant even as new technology comes about, new things are developed. Together, this enables something that can be balanced, an approach that respects both ethical absolutes and the practicalities of good governance. So in this, what we see is a combination of decentralization to ensure that the legal system maintains grounded, well, ideas based on local knowledge and society's wisdom, the trade-offs that encourages rational, pragmatic, incremental legal reforms, the foundation of an ethical society where we really anchor law in rational principles to protect individual rights, and the individual being the highest moral priority, something that then allows us to have an economic foundation, streamlining the legal system to support free markets and economic cooperation, not the large company, the individual. A harmonious blend of natural law and common law is something that can ensure justice being both principled and adaptable. So together, that's really how we see the law develop through all of this. So through these lectures, we've covered the philosophical aspects of law. And the philosophy of law really is one that grapples with the enduring tensions that come from any competing values. People will sit there and tell you in an anarchist society that everything's going to agree. People don't. Individual versus collective, predictability versus flexibility, objective morality versus evolving norms are always going to compete. And we need a system that allows these contrasts to reflect the foundational questions about the nature and purpose of why we have law and why we have society as a whole. So that then takes us back to the full concept of the individual versus the collective. Rand will underscore the primacy of individual rights. In this, she'll assert that the individual is the fundamental unit of moral and legal concern. The law exists here to protect life, liberty, and property from infringement of others. This includes the state, of course. Any legal system that prioritizes collective welfare over individual rights is one that she would argue to risk degenerating into tyranny, and one that will. It is what we saw in Hayek as the road to serfdom. Laws here cannot sacrifice the individual for the sake of the group. Rather, they must ensure the freedom necessary for each person who wishes to pursue their rational self-interest. That's not doing whatever you want. Rational self-interest, of course, doesn't impinge on the rights of others, but your property rights give you, well, effective carte blanche to do what you want with your property. And that doesn't mean people will like it. It wouldn't, for instance, allow the state to ever take your property to build a, well, gentrification project. If 1,000 people all want to sell their houses and one curmudgeon doesn't want to, well, the answer is very simple. Build around the curmudgeon. He's there. So Hayek didn't reject the importance of individual rights, but emphasized that law fosters collective order through a coordination the coordinated actions of individuals. He views the legal system as one of those mechanisms that will enable peaceful coexistence and cooperation in a complex society. And here, laws create the conditions under which individuals can interact productively. They thus form spontaneous order. They create a system that benefits the collective without imposing top-down control. It is really Adam Smith's hand, his invisible hand that comes down and spontaneously creates. That then takes us to predictability and flexibility. Sal looked at that a little bit differently. He looked at the trade-offs more than anything else, and those inherent in legal design, particularly between rigid rules and adaptable ones. Predictable laws are essential for stability. They provide individuals and businesses with the certainty they need to plan and act. However, when something is too rigid, as it can be in a civil law system, that rigidity can render the legal system incapable of addressing unforeseen circumstances or evolving to societal needs, which opens up avenues for power and the concentrations thereof. Where you allow people to arbitrarily change, then they can move the rules. And sometimes these rules then evolve in a way as outside of the nature of, well, what society needs. So Sal would advocate a pragmatic approach here, balancing competing demands, recognizing that no legal system can achieve perfection and not seeking it. Hayek also introduced the concept of law as spontaneous order. Here, an evolving system that adapts through experience rather than deliberate design is one that we should embrace. Hayek would argue that the flexibility of common law, as I've noted, develops incrementally through those judicial decisions, and because of this, allows anything new to be adapted. We can find an analogy in nearly anything to what we want to implement. And because of that, we can create a system that embraces all of the changes that come from the rapid change we find through society. And it's not new. If we go back to the 17th, 18th, 19th century, we talk about rapid change now. But imagine if you're someone who has never gone out of their village and suddenly there's a train, suddenly there is post. These were massive changes back then. And we find that throughout the last, well, the whole Enlightenment period, change has occurred rapidly. And the common law has enabled that to be embraced and integrated. Now, virtue, again, as we started with several years back with Aristotle, is part of the objective morality that Rand would see as the foundation of law. It is rational ethics grounded in the requirement of, well, protecting and aiding in the flourishing of human life that we must create as a guide to our legal systems. Moral relativism, that postmodern idea that we see taking hold of society, that allows evolving norms, is incompatible with justice. Laws need to be firmly rooted in rational principles to ensure consistency and integrity. This happens across time and across context. So if we really want, then we can contrast that with the view of Hayek, who saw, well, views and traditions and evolving norms as a vital source of legal development. But his argument didn't really contradict that of Rand. Rather, he was arguing for the accumulated practices and customs of society, those containing wisdom, to be balanced by the natural law, to be balanced by a judiciary that, well, would take the knowledge that surpasses the capacity of any individual or group to design consciously and integrate that with the trial and error approach, knowing that we make mistakes, as Sal saw, and to allow society to evolve through decentralized knowledge and cultural traditions that can be guided by the legal system. So this divergence between Rand and the immutable ethics versus Hayek and a preference for organic evolution of norms is really not that different. It's something shaped by societal experience, but it is a rational shaping. It isn't the crowd, the mob. It is rather the knowledge of all the people built up over time. So we have a combination in this of moral clarity and adaptability and resilience in the face of change. So what we seek in law is something that balances the individual and the collective. The focus on individual rights is sacrosanct. And while that ensures freedom, the collective order is one that allows the individual to flourish. The paradox here is that it's only through individual rights that the collective itself flourishes in what is decentralized coordination. It also gives us a combination of predictability and flexibility. The trade-offs that we talk about provide a way that a moral foundation that respects tradition and the practical benefits of evolving society can be combined. So to really summarize everything we've done in these 8 chapters, in these many, many different lectures on the philosophy of law, I'll go into both a conclusion and a call to action. So the law is the foundation of a free, orderly, and prosperous society. And that's important. Contrary to what we see in the no growth movement, what we want is wealth. We want everyone to have an opportunity for wealth, not by tearing down others, but by building their own so that everyone's richer, not by taking and redistributing, but by creating more. And here, law must protect liberty by safeguarding individual rights, by promoting the order that provides the framework for stability and allows us to adapt to the changing needs of society. And in combining, well, a combination of the common law and natural law, these elements can be harmonized and law becomes a tool of governance, and both that and a guarantor of, well, justice, allowing us to create a wealthy society based on human flourishing. Not experimenting with people, but allowing people to experiment themselves, to take risk themselves, to benefit themselves. And in this, we create harmony. A legal system must draw from the moral clarity of natural law and practical adaptability of common law, as I said. Here, again, I'll emphasize natural law is the ethical compass of society. It ensures justice is rooted in universal principles. Common law allows that to be guided. No matter how much we know, we're never going to be perfect. And our interpretation of natural law will be flawed. While we can see an immutable truth exists, we may not understand it. It is not the truth that is wrong, it is our understanding thereof. And the common law allows us to adapt and evolve around that point so that we can better understand natural law over time. Through precedents, we ensure that legal systems remain relevant and responsive, and we form a dynamic, enduring framework that really captures the conservative, the timeless, and the transient. So through this, whether we're talking about Aristotle or Montesquieu, Hayek, Sowell, Mises, Rand, or any of the other people I've covered so far, and there have been quite a number of others, we form a way of converging law and rules in a way that illuminates the path forward. If we think about it, changing the rules of monopoly doesn't give us a fair game. If we change the rules halfway through the game, then someone benefits at the cost of another. And when we make trade-offs and practical constraints imposed on our legal systems, when we put these there in a way that, well, the anointed use to seek a utopia, then we end up creating something that may benefit some, but at the cost of many others. And the economic foundations of such a functioning legal order will be undermined. It means that those rational ethics that we've embraced for so long will be undermined. And what we see today in this moral ambiguity, the postmodern concept of ethics, of even getting rid of ethics, is that the end is to undermine the very system that you want to implement and create a system that does no longer protect human rights, flourishing, or individual liberty. And that highest aim that we talked about is lost. So as we reflect on the role of law, the future of law, we need to be guided by the principles of both common law and natural law. We need to think why we're doing it. A just legal system is not one that seeks perfection. It's one that seeks balance. It's one that seeks fairness. It's one that seeks liberty. A just legal system is one that respects the dignity of the individual while fostering cooperation, that which is necessary for a thriving society to grow. So to conclude, I'll take Ayn Rand's words that I believe capture the essence of justice and the purpose of law. She said, "The purpose of law is not to prevent men from making mistakes, but to prevent them from using force to achieve their goals." And that's what I see as the enduring mission of law: to empower, to protect, and to ensure that the human spirit can reach its fullest potential without the shadow of coercion. And in that, I believe we should all aim to strive to uphold an ideal in the system that we build and the principles we defend. So I hope you enjoyed my view of the philosophy of law, and we'll continue in different areas of philosophy next time. But for the moment, questions?
I can try to formulate a question. I mean, there's so much there. It's hard for me to get the thoughts too. I really like Rand. You talked about one of the things, her divergence from uh, some of the other
Mm,
philosophers. Um, I feel like I feel like one of my problems with Rand, I feel like she's one of the most reasonable and rational philosophers that in the way she articulates things and points out everyone else's irrationality. But I think you even alluded to like she doesn't like the like theology and the wisdom and that old stuff. I feel like she herself kind of idolized rationality and didn't and she believed that a human could be like fully rational or infallible almost. I feel like this is kind of one of her flaws. And then even you could see it in her life, like to me, like in her love affairs, it, in the book and her real life, in like in some of her writings and real life, she wanted to, you know, make the perfect, like John Galt being the perfect rational human, but that itself is irrational. And she didn't want to accept, you know, the
well, I
infallibility of human, and that's also why she didn't want agree. Maybe why she didn't agree with the iterations over time, because no individual or no group of people can really be totally rational, infallible. That's why you needed across time and iterations to is so important.
but if you actually look at it, even in Atlas Shrugged, John Galt is perfect. He doesn't foresee everything. He makes mistakes. But the thing is, no human will ever not do that. On top of that, she does embrace and compare the aspects of common law, like with the judge that goes into Colorado versus those who stay, and those who embrace, well, rational thought, who don't go into judicial activism. She sees as being the idea of rational thought. It's not necessarily perfection. We aim for perfection, but I think the problem people get is she was very vocal in these things, but she didn't expect that you would be perfect, but you should always aim to get as close as you can, knowing that you will fail. And it's also part of why people misunderstand her concept of capitalism. They look at what we have in mercantilism and crony capitalism now and um, compare that, thinking the captured large organizations that are bound in this sort of state group are really what she was talking about. But then if you read Atlas Shrugged, you will see that the Taggart brother was really weak. And while that was the large corporation, it was the failed entity. Just being a big corporation wasn't the ideal. And that's more importantly seen in something like Fountainhead. In Fountainhead, her hero, her protagonist, fails many times. He refuses to actually be part of things. He faces criminal justice over his actions. He won't bend. And for that, he ends up working as a common laborer, despite being one of the greatest architects in history, so to speak, at least in the story. So you've got to take all of that into account. And because she's written it as a story, there are many aspects that, well, unless you go into a really close reading many times, you start missing. So then again, it's like Adam Smith. People talk about capitalism and forget that Adam Smith said, as soon as you get a few business people together, they collude. But that wasn't a good thing. That's why we need laws, why we need systems to stop them doing. It's not just about one or the other. We've got to take it all as a whole. And so back to my quote, I would say, again, the purpose of law is not to prevent people from making mistakes. That isn't where she's going. We can rationally screw up, we can rationally make mistakes, but we should aim to learn from those mistakes and not do them again in the same way.
I have a question.
Yes.
Right, an opinion and then a question. So I see law as like a kind of reflection of humanity, where it constantly evolves and law evolves alongside to reflect humanity's
Mm-hmm.
ability and morals. And in different
Mm,
areas of the world, law again reflects the
mm,
different areas of society and morals. And as humanity evolves, so does law alongside
mm,
humanity. With this, like, and this goes back to what you were saying in part that law must remain fluid because society is ever changing. Um, with that in mind, how do you see law evolving and I'm going to say AI, though I don't like the term AI, I prefer the term intelligent automation. How do you see law evolving alongside humanity as AI, because more people understand that term, evolves and gets more integrated with humanity?
well, my views on actual ignorance are that, like everything else, it's not intelligent. It's the equivalent of a hammer. And the thing is, with a hammer, if you use it well, it can be good, bad, or indifferent, depending what your outcomes are. So AI doesn't replace humanity, maybe a few useless bureaucratic jobs and things like that. Um, we're not seeing the promises that people keep making. Um, we keep seeing people touting automated vehicles. The World Economic Forum jumped on that bandwagon saying that no one would need to own cars because we'd be all driving these sort of hired taxis that, well, someone has to own. But the reality is things are too complex. And as much as everyone loves to jump around saying my Tesla is going to be automated, that's when they will run into the back of a truck because, well, no one expected the truck to be painted the same color as the sky. That sort of silly stuff. There's just too much complexity to cover everything. And the simple reality is that no matter what we think AI does, well, it's taking what humans have done and collating it. It doesn't innovate. So you could argue, as like one person did, there have been aims to try and get attribution to AI, but sitting there telling the AI what to do and then guiding it and going, no, that's not right. No, could you try this instead? Is not the AI creating. It's humanity. So I can use a word program and I can type and I can fix my stuff much better. And I can go through and I can spell check and I can grammar check much better. And that's even better now because whether I like it or not, Word has now implemented smart agents into all of this. I didn't ask it to, but it has because Microsoft had bought all this stuff. And so whenever I open Word now, I have this silly little stupid new version of Clippy, for those who remember it, Copilot, that select the icon or press Alt+I to draft with Copilot. That will come up and want to help me, usually in ways that piss me off. Grammarly does the same, others do the same. But at the end of the day, it comes down to us as humans to decide. So we have tools and we have things that will automate a lot of tasks and make our lives easier. But to get back to all of this, it's not going to replace law or anything else. It's just going to give us more opportunity and continued growth. So the end of growth isn't here. We just have new tools. And I'm afraid that's going to displace a lot of people. It's not going to take their jobs, but it is going to displace people because some jobs will be different. 100 and something years ago, farriers got replaced. I mean, there are a few farriers and blacksmiths and things like that, the odd Fletcher somewhere on earth, but there are not many of them because, well, crafts may sell a little bit, but you're never going to go out there and replace your Ford or your Toyota with some horse-drawn carriage anymore, unless you're Amish. And you're not going to go on a road trip across the country if you're Amish.
Over to Nathan. Did you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah. Go.
I had a question. It's more of also an observation and a question. So, in terms of everybody's optimism about where society is going, particularly in the United States, I read about that university students, undergrad, are having difficulty with reading assignments, and that there's this phenomena isn't just in one or two universities, but across the board. So my question is there room for optimism with where we're heading in terms of studying fundamentals of different subjects?
Oh, of course there's room for optimism. I mean, we're at the best time in human history. We're at the wealthiest time, the freest time, etc. I mean, whether we ruin that is up to us, but it's up to us to be optimistic. We're not collapsing the world. And that's just the myth that people say to try and get control over us. I mean, the worst predictions in climate science, if you actually want to be accurate on them, and I'm not even going to sugarcoat it, if everything's right and everyone's 100% correct, then we've got about 1,200 years to worry. That's the absolute worst actual stuff that anyone can throw at this. And guess what? It won't be as bad as the Earth has been. The Earth back a few tens of millions of years ago was about 4 to 6 degrees warmer, and it didn't die. It wasn't the warm Earth that killed the dinosaurs. In fact, everything was flourishing. There were more plants and everything else. Big rock from space killed them. And the point here is the only way that we're going to stop any of that is knowledge and power and what we can do as humans. And if we want to live past the dinosaurs and we want to be more than a future cockroach that's crawling in the dust, then we need to embrace growth and optimism and actually do something that's going to build us into more than we are, so that we can do more than this universe will throw at us. And it will, because eventually big rocks are going to come from space and hit the Earth if we don't blow ourselves up first because of some stupid thing. And that's the whole point. We will survive only because of our knowledge and our ability to reason. And if we give that up, then that's where we'll not be optimistic anymore.
Okay,
Thank you.
any more questions? Anyone? Otherwise, I think we are running near the end of the hour.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to thank everyone for attending this year, all the different classes. Next year, we will be continuing, and we will be continuing, as Craig mentioned, with different subjects, the philosophy of money, and more to be announced. Keep an eye on the Slack for more information there. We will also, is that a hand up or a clap? 357. I think that was a clap. So I don't know what we're going to do about like a kind of certification. I know I've mentioned that before, just maybe something like I attended the philosophy course classes. I will think on that and discuss with Craig. Next year we will try and formalize this a bit more and expand on the class. The class has slowly grown over the years, but I would like to try and get the Twitter space thing working properly so we have a wider audience. Okay,
That would be
Craig,
good.
if you would like
All
to
right.
add. Also, I'm going to talk to Craig and try and get him in on a end of year, New Year's Eve little Zoom thing. But this is the first time I've mentioned this to him, so we will see.
All right. Well, let me know the details later in the week.
Okay. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Craig. Everyone.
All right. Have a great night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.